I'm on time for the first time in a long time, just because our house just got sold, so I'm in a good mood.
Yeah, we're live and good to go. I've just been watching how many people are coming in. Looks like it's slowing down now. Just about everybody's in, so we can probably get this thing going. So yeah, first of all, my name is Aron Weinkauf, winemaker, vineyard manager, Spottswoode, here with Martin Reyes. I'm gonna let him introduce himself a little bit more, and he's gonna get us running.
Hi, everybody. Martin, or Martin, if you're bilingual, whatever you want to say. Been in business for about 20 years, a longtime friend of Spottswoode, both Spottswoode and Beth, and of course, Mary and Aron. I'm delighted to be here with you. It's been about 20 years for me. My background is in off-premise national program buying and importing. And a few years ago, I started Reyes Wine Group, LLC, a consultancy of multidisciplinary expertise in the wine trade. Importantly, I think for today, also for Spottswoode, I'm involved in global sustainability and climate initiatives that include work with Spottswoode. And more recently, I'm a co-founder and co-president of Wine Unified. I'll keep that short. You're not here to listen about me. If you're more curious, you can go to my website, business website, reyeswinegroup.com. But I urge you not to visit the dad humor page. Don't go there. That's definitely not a place you want to visit. Just it's only for grown ups. But I do want to talk to you about the story that really merges between my personal fan story of Spottswoode. We're all fans of Spottswoode, whether we work inside or outside. And in 2005, I started working as a small wine shop delivery stock boy buyer, where I was hired by Spottswoode to handle the private cellar under Mary Novak's house. And every few months I would go in and I would catalog wines, and every single time the new releases came out of the Sauvignon Blanc, I was instructed to pull aside several cases of Spottswoode Sauvignon Blanc new release and don't touch them at all. They're for Mary's consumption. And I faithfully did that for a number of years, and there was a steady depletion of that over time. And that's been Mary's favorite wine, was her favorite wine for our life. And they've been making this now since 1984. Small lot production since 1984. And it is central, I think, to the story of the family. It's sourced from exceptional vineyard blocks. They're farmed throughout Napa, Sonoma, and of course the estate. And that's really where I think the story starts. And that's what I have in my glass here with Aron. So Aron, I mentioned a little bit about the fact that there's a variety of sources that come throughout, and we're releasing now the 2020. So I find fascinating the fact that there's a variety of vineyard sites that you source from. Why is that? Why do you do that? Why go through all that trouble?
Well, more than anything, it was just the availability. You know, as premium sites have been turned into red sites. Really, the best Sauvignon Blanc oftentimes has been replaced in the valley. So, in our constant search for top sites, it's taken us around to many places, and there's been a number of vineyards that we've tried and not worked with in the past. And yeah, to find these sites that just have the natural balance and the natural quality that we're always striving for is really just paramount to that decision. It's not a lot more than that. I mean, we fall in love with certain clones, we fall in love with certain characteristics, but yeah, it's certainly expanded where we look, and as everybody sees and knows, it's obviously multiple appellations that drive this thing.
Right, and then when you bring it in, you don't, I mean, there's variety throughout the site selection, but also when you bring it in, there's multiple vessels, multiple fermentation, multiple yeast and so forth, right? So that continues throughout. I find that fascinating, and there's a lot of trouble that you go through for that. I think.
Yeah, it's always been a funny thing. You know, we always watching the pictures change as the sun bounces in and out from behind the clouds. Needless to say, yeah, no, it's always been a funny thing because we always say we make wines of a time and a place, and you wonder, how does that balance and work with the fact that we make two of our three wines that are from multiple places, multiple appellations, and it really is that when it comes time to blend, yes, we look to make these blends to really produce the quantity and quality of wine that we're looking for. But in the end, all of these wines are treated individually, constantly looking for them and working with the growers to find their own sweet spots, their own balance points, making sure qualitatively we're picking everything when we want them to be picked, and working with growers to move them towards organics so that hopefully their ethos can help align with our ethos, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's really about continuing to treat every individual block, whether it's our own prized estate or other places we work with on an individual basis.
You mentioned the time and place, and so we're tasting, of course, the 2020, which has been for a number of reasons a unique time and place and time, of course. And so, that is what we have. Still, I think this is going to be bottled very shortly, right? This is a brand new release. It's still in.
Yeah, it's a little cloudier right now than normal because this we filter this next Monday, not in 5 days or 4 days, but Monday, the next Monday, and then we immediately go into bottle with it.
Which means we got to reschedule our hangout on that Sunday because you're going to be crazy busy. So you got to come over sooner, I think, maybe this weekend. Anyway, but back to the wine. I know people are going to be asking, so let's just talk about it head on, the fact that this was picked in 2020. And so tell us a little bit about that.
So everybody knows the joys of challenges. Of course, we were all dealing with COVID, each in our own individual way.
The entire year, like what level next of everything, right? Next challenge.
Yeah, we kept keeping our fingers crossed that things would actually get a little bit easier, but obviously we started off with some very crazy weather, extremely hot year that led into a massive dry lightning storm over the entire state of California that triggered 650 different lightning strikes and fires at that period of time. The closest one to us was the LNU complex fire that's what kicked it off. I had to write the date down, August 17th. So that was pretty early in the scope of things, but it was all about heat and fires, and the reality was it was pretty awesome to see how everything was mitigated. To watch all of the different vineyards we work with. There was absolutely one vineyard that was right where the fire started that we didn't harvest, we didn't utilize, but the rest of the vineyards were great. And we even had the opportunity, got a letter from a neighbor that had some fruit in last minute to pick up, and so we were able to pick up some old vine Sauvignon Blanc that went into this for the first time. And it's just it was one of those kind of serendipitous opportunities, and with the writing on the wall that we might lose a vineyard or two, that was something we jumped on quickly, and then after that, the whole premise is we care about our growers, we obviously care about our own estate, so we're going to go in, we're going to pick everything, we're going to do what's best by the wine, and then we're going to go through and evaluate things afterwards, where we're able to look at things analytically, we're able to ship things out for the best analysis, and ensure that we're not making any wines that have smoke taint, and that was exactly what we did. And the beauty of it all was many of these places were fairly far from origination sites of the fires, and so we actually have great wines that are not smoke tainted. And then, of course, the beauty of it all was we were picked off before the next fire, which was the glass fire that was local here in the St. Helena area started. So Again, it was one of those things where, you know, we have to balance it. We're picking everything off. We're not trying to pick things overripe. We're not trying to pick things underripe. We're not paralyzed by not being able to make these decisions or get analysis real time, which was not available, and just making the best of the situation. So we are tremendously happy, feel tremendously fortunate, and at the same time super excited about everything we've been able to bring in from 2020.
I know that as we're tasting the 20, this is a delicious and beautiful wine. Of course, being that it's white, it's released earlier and the process is different. And it sort of dodges less bullets as it gets into the bottle. And I think for posterity, when we look back at this video for our mailing list, who is going to probably see more virtual types of these events now that we've all gotten used to this kind of format, right? And so for posterity, I think it's good for us to know now that the answers about things like the 2020 Reds and your estate Reds is while the signs are obviously highly encouraging, there's still a longer conversation to have about what the 2020s will look like in the future. I'm sort of saying that in a sense to handle some of the questions that may come up about how are the 2020 Reds going to be. We talked about the Sauvignon Blanc, which is
they're going to be every bit as good as the whites.
Yeah.
I mean, we've done the analysis. We did the work. We made very sensible decisions. We looked at a number of different things at the time, and have since, once everything was finished, sent up 100% of everything off, and we were happy that nothing is tainted.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful, I have to say, and that also emphasizes the granularity, I think, of Napa, where obviously we know that not everybody fared well. Some people fared wonderfully based upon location, pick time, extraction techniques, all kinds of things. And we're not monolithic Napa Valley, right? What's happening in Coombsville is different than what's happening in St. Helena, Calistoga, Charles Valley, et cetera. So that's, I think, something for all of us to recognize. I think there's more variety here in many ways than there is in Burgundy. Aspects, soil, variety of elevation, and so forth. And I think there's something for us to be excited about. That sounds like Spottswoode has. And I tasted the 20s with you early on at our place in Vallejo, and they were stellar. Even going through ML, the 2020 Reds. And this, I should say, is absolutely fantastic. Before we move on to the next wine, any last words on what we're tasting today from your perspective?
No, I mean, I know we got a couple questions come in before this event started up, and a lot of people always want to know, how does this vintage compare to the previous vintage? 2020 was a warm year. This is going to be a little bit more kind of ripe fruit characteristics. Still has great acidity, but this has great viscosity. This is going to be open, ready to go. A little less kind of reductive than oftentimes when it hits the bottle. So I'm pretty excited for it.
I am too. I can't wait to try the finished bottle. So now we're moving on to the 2017 Red, and
try to adjust the chip inside my brain so I can start thinking about a different vintage.
Right. Going back in time now 3 years, and I want you to tell us a story. Well, even backing up for a minute, I know we chat earlier. We shoot the S quite a bit. You and I, we talk about all kinds of things during our runs that are, I think, picking up speed, I'd say. Wouldn't you say, around the track?
Unfortunately, I am not. Maybe the conversation is I am not.
Okay. Well, I think from a very beginning of 6-8 months ago when we started through the pandemic, I think we're doing okay, Aaron. But okay. I hope so. We are. So the 2017, there's something really special about 17 that you've brought up to me over numerous times, even more recently during lunch today. And one of the most magical elements of wine is how it enshrines not just a story of that year, but also the story of the intention of the winemaker and the voice of that site. And you said to me that 17 vintages like 17 show that, and show that philosophy and show that intention in full relief. I found it fascinating hearing you talk about it, and please share that right now if you can.
Well, it's more that idea that, especially a place like this where, first we're a small family-owned estate. We do all of the vineyard management, all of the winemaking ourselves. Um, there's not just science in this. There's soul, there's heart, there's religion, there's all of our beliefs that go into what we're trying to do. And yeah, it starts with a vision, and it's always been, the special thing about the estate is that, here it is the true expression of what we believe, because we are managing it from start to finish, from grape to wine, always with that singular vision of how we are interpreting ultimately what Mother Nature is giving us for that vintage. And it's lately, it seems like since taking over in 2011, there's a lot of variety to choose from. This has been a pretty big spectrum of climatic variables, extremes in 2017, extremes in 2020, other extremes in 2011. And so, and of course you're always left with your memories. You're left with the work you do. You're left with how hard you had to watch certain things, because you're walking such fine lines when heat's the heat spiking, or how you manage evacuations, or how you manage not being able to access certain areas. So you're left with this cumulative memories, and of course you also are constantly interpreting as you go, and you're constantly it's pretty hard to take a vineyard and make such radical swings one way or another with it. So you start with this vision, and as the year progresses and new variables pop up, you try to give it little nudges here and there where you think you need it to go, but you're constantly just learning how to balance the variables that Mother Nature is giving you, and it's why some of the more challenging vintages that are filled with those extremes for me become so much more poignant, because they're that kind of raw expression of what we're doing, how hard we're working, and how we're interpreting those vintages, and we make a very specific intent to have those wines be of a time and of a place. And in doing so, we don't want things to be diluted by over ripeness. We don't want things to be over manipulated in the winery. We want these natural expressions to hopefully be at the forefront of what we're doing, and at the same time express all of our attention to detail, starting from all of our vineyard work early season and carrying on through to harvest.
Now, one of the things that bears reminding everyone, and it bears reminding me too, is that oftentimes the role of winemaker and vineyard manager are split. And in our case, and for Spottswoode, you are both. You are both the farmer and the winemaker, and that allows these vintages, and this one especially 17, to really speak of both its time and its place, and that's worth imprinting upon us how special that is for Spottswoode.
Yeah, it's always the hope, and obviously these are cumulative efforts. This starts with a vision that certainly I've been part of, but this is always bigger than me, and this is the unification of a large team working hard to do this.
I know that winemakers tend to be hard to please. I know, but Aron, I mean, during harvest, you get really picky.
We have to, right?
We have to, right? Yes. So
otherwise it wouldn't be a harvest, Martin.
No, that's true. That's a little
that's Martin's dad humor.
That great, but let's see that. You with 17, I think you picked three tries, I believe, right?
Yeah, 17 red vintage was really split up into three primary harvests, almost a third each, with all of that being basically just how the vineyard was responding to a radical heat spell. Some have heard me talk already about 17 vintage, but 17 we had over 10 consecutive days over 100 degrees, with 3 consecutive days 3 of those days consecutively over 110 degrees, with 2 of those topping out above 115. And so it was just, these are radical, unheard of heat spells that we really never faced before. And obviously, you don't know exactly what to expect. You hope that the cumulative efforts, the health of the vine, the health of the ecosystem, the health of the soils, everything supports your vineyard and allows it to survive such extremes. But again, these aren't extremes that we have ever faced up until that point in time, and certainly don't face with a lot of regularity, or at least historically hadn't faced with a lot of regularity. And so, yeah, it's a period of just, you're a little anxious. You certainly sit back and watch. You try to get out there in the middle of the day to try to keep an eye on how things are responding. And then you watch everything day by day. I mean, I was walking every single block daily, and sometimes I would walk it twice. I'd walk it midday just to see if things were stressing more than others. And sometimes you go out and walk it in the morning to see how things are recuperating at night when they get a little bit of moderation. And yeah, it's fascinating to see the resiliency of some of the plants. But it ended up, how we basically broke it out was there was about a third of the vineyard that wasn't going to continue to hold its fruit well, at least based on our interpretation. So we picked that. Another third of it was able to hang its fruit for another 3 weeks and didn't accumulate any sugar, but just went through in a little bit more of an advanced a little bit more maturation. Pick that. And then we had another third of it that we were able to wait another basically like week and a half before we started picking it. And that was able to actually accumulate a little sugar. So, we had stuff that year that basically we had everything from about 11.8 alcohols to 14.2 alcohols, and then everything in between. So it's just it's this fascinating combination of everything that really made the dynamics of the vineyard what it is, and of course carries through to what makes the wine itself so dynamic.
The 17, as I'm tasting, bringing it to what's in the glass now that I'm tasting, it's a fascinating wine, in part because of the counterintuitiveness of thinking all these heat spikes, all this warmth, and yet you have a wine that, for physiological reasons within the vine, you've got a 13.7 alcohol, right? As well as being able to have that attention to detail. This wine is born, this vintage of 2017, right? The wines come from it. They're essentially born of struggle, right? There's an intellectuality to these wines, and specifically to what I'm tasting now. It is fascinating to see the strength and the ability to hold impact and power without being aggressive or without being overburdened with. There's a focus to this wine, and I'm happy to hear more about what your thoughts about it as we taste it.
Well, I mean, it's funny because obviously each vintage gives different characteristics, gives us different things, but at the same time, in each vintage, I feel like we're always looking for the same thing. We're looking for the block to express each individual block, each individual vineyard, to express itself in its most complete and balanced form. So we don't want to sacrifice things by letting things hang out too long. And at the same time, we don't have that desire to pick everything early and underripe either. So it's just a constant balancing act and always looking for the best that a block can do. And in a year like 17, where we look at a block and we'll say, well, it's not going to get any more than 22 bricks sugar. That's fine. We're happy with that. That is what it's going to be. And then we evaluate afterwards, because we believe in you get to the point where you kind of have to have the faith that everything you've put into the care of a place, everything you put into the care of the soils, all of the work that you put into for not only that given year, but the years before, is ultimately going to help carry itself and give itself the balance and the equanimity and the strength that it needs to be what we expect is really one of our, a top wine. And it's really what we always look for. And it's always, it's always that funny thing where, we're not looking just for massive strength. We're looking for strength and persistence. And we talked about it earlier. I've made the reference before. I believe in the strength of the yogi versus over the strength of the bodybuilder. We don't want we don't feel that there is a need for things to be texturally massive, for things to be strong. There is strength and beauty and nuance that is irreplaceable, and that's kind of what we seek out every year.
There's a question that I like to bring up. One of the people who are watching here, and I think it's a perfectly timed question, because setting the stage a little bit, there is a perception, especially in the old world, that people are resisting to go into either organic or biodynamic farming practices, because it limits their capacity to survive difficult vintages. And that is certainly true in certain areas of the world. That is not necessarily true in parts that have a Mediterranean climate like Northern California. And in fact, so the question being basically, did Spottswoode suffer more in 17 by being organic certified and biodynamic, et cetera, compared to others in Napa? There's an emphatic answer. I know it's coming because we've talked about the resiliency of the vineyard, but other than saying, no, we didn't, why not?
Well, yes, as you just said, no, we didn't. We actually did very well by everything that I've heard, both from friends, colleagues, and saw around the valley during the vintage. We were very happy with overall fruit quality, fruit structure, fruit health, and yeah, scientifically, we're not able to trace it back, but I absolutely believe 100% that it's the combination of intelligent decisions made long before me to start farming organically, soils that are dynamic, that are resistant, canopies that add more shading than exposure to the fruit, and the support to continue to work with great organic composts, and I just believe, unavoidably, that the dynamics of a system makes a system more resilient. It seems I don't know how to argue that that's not the case.
Yeah, and to be fair to the question, the premise, I recognize where it comes from, in the sense that Jeff, who person who asked, is that there are situations environmentally in which you pull out the rug of either pesticides, herbicides, or conventional methods that are intending to shield the vineyard from extreme conditions. And in the long term, however, what we're saying, this has been discussed for many years before. This is a perfectly timed question. I think is awesome. But ultimately, what we're saying here is that in the long run, farming the way you're farming, holistically, as an ecosystem, right, is what actually produces a more resilient vineyard. So I wanted to make sure that while we acknowledge the premise of the question, and it's very fair, it's logical, given what is out there in literature or in the media, through vineyards in Burgundy and the Rhone and Bordeaux, that there is the truth is actually the opposite when you think about a fully healthy and balanced vineyard like Spottswoode. So I think it's good that you brought that up.
Yeah, and the reality is now there is a lot more research, a lot more academic proof to the point, and still, all of that said, all of these decisions are just about our perspective and how we view these things.
Yeah, so we're going to move on to now the 18 Lindenhurst, because I think I want to. We're going to come
and
back
therefore the 18 vintage.
All right, the 18 vintage. Let's start with the 18 vintage, right? But we are going to come back to the relationship of the vintages after we taste Lindenhurst. And so we do know briefly. Actually, why don't you set the stage of how the 18 vintage was, generally speaking, and then moving into how that manifests into Lindenhurst.
It's the New Orleans of the wine world. It's the Big Easy. It's 18 was the contrast. As we talked about, 18 was a warm growing season up until veraison, and then after veraison, it was one of the most moderate veraison periods that we've had. We didn't really have any major heat spikes. I don't know that we even passed 100 degrees in all of veraison, which it sets up for a long ripening season in which you have so much flexibility and when and how you choose to pick and process your wines. And of course, you get great color and aromatic preservation from a cooler vintage.
Yeah, so we do know that this Lindenhurst in general has, well, the vintage itself, we've seen that there's great beauty, great color, great extraction. It's an easily accommodating weather for how 18 came through, and Lindenhurst, I think, captures that beautifully. And in terms of just, this is the first one I tasted earlier today during lunch, and I was like, it's so delicious right now, absolutely delicious right now. The way it's showing, and within the context of Spottswoode, how does the 18 for you show at this moment, and why?
You hit the nail on the head. I don't need to duplicate that. No, it's great, and it's exactly what we hope it's going to be. It's fruit forward, but still beautifully structured. It doesn't lack forageability, but at the same time, it's got a great presence right off the bat, and it can be so easily drank and enjoyed. Yeah. And it's a wine that we've, as we've evolved with what this wine is for us and how we make this wine, it's become just such a beautiful component in the lineup of our 3 commercial wines.
Yeah, and I think that you say, this has been around for a while, but as we wait for the estate to develop, right?
I mean, it's since inception, we always kind of talked about this was the wine that was a little more fruit forward, a little more approachable in its youth, and the wine that was made to drink while you're waiting for the estate to come to full maturity.
Right. So yeah, I can drink the 18 Lindenhurst all day. Honestly, it's delicious.
Yeah, but it's always been the charm of it's really the charm and beauty of this wine, and what makes it special within our lineup, because it is a representation of multiple appellations across Napa Valley. It is our Napa Valley blend. It does allow us to work with varietals that we don't grow here on the estate, and brings about new nuances and new characteristics that we can really enjoy for what they are.
As I'm going back into the 17 on the nose, and this has been open now for a couple of hours, I want to also mention how much the 17 is evolving the estate, because I want to come back to that in a few minutes, because I want to talk about the 18. 17 it's a cerebral wine. It's fascinating, and it's developing every time I come back to there's something new to the 17. But I want to jump into the actual estate, 18, and I know that when you generally think of the Spottswoode estate, and you think of the vintage that it is, you say, okay, well, this is the best and greatest expression of the property, whereas Lindenhurst, of course, is property as well as some sources of fruit that allows you to blend for similar reasons and benefits as to the Sauvignon Blanc, right? The 18 itself. Oh, is there anything you want to say about the blending component of Lindenhurst before we move on to the estate?
No, only, with the vineyards we've chosen to work with, we've chosen because, great growers, people we identify, places where we know qualitatively everybody's willing to work with us for us to achieve what our goals are. And, it's it's so it's a fun contrast, you know, to be able to do both, where you get to get out and look at other vineyards and see other people's kind of visions and how, you know, they've built their vineyards and things they've incorporated, and then of course come back and look at our own vineyard and consider a lot of these same questions.
Yeah. Now you recall. Thank you for that insight. You recall that 18 to you as a in terms of vintage, moderate vintage, and you mentioned the word sounding board. And as we talk about the estate and what's in our glass now, obviously well scored, which is I think scores are always like the third pillow in the hotel room, right? It's there in case you need it. Otherwise, the wine stands on its own, and commercially speaking. But in this case, obviously, there's a lot of buzz around the 18. But more importantly, it's only a part of the narrative of Spottswoode. And so, within the context of that, how is the 18 vintage showing its sense of place and time?
I mean, the 18 certainly has great beauty. It has all of the things we're looking for. It's always funny to me because I always become more effusive with the challenging vintages. And
right.
So, you know, the memories of 17, I can tell you, are much stronger than the memories of 18, because 18, you know, there wasn't the anxiety, there wasn't the pressure. You know, it came on. It was a year where we had great rains before the season. We had great growth throughout the vintage. We were just, you know, constantly monitoring growth and making sure the balance that we were looking for in the vineyard was great. And then, of course, with the cool post Asian period, it was just one of those things where you could just sit back and enjoy the fruit tasting, enjoy the optics of it, enjoy the flavors, and watch the evolutions, and never feel the pressures or anxieties of some of the complications that the fastballs that Mother Nature can throw.
So you mentioned something earlier that I really love this idea of that these things, these wines, every decision that you make doesn't get made in a vacuum, right? We talk about 2020 vintage. Potentially somebody would say, oh, you know, let's talk about the positives, not the fires. Well, the fact is that the fires are part of that time and place, part of the story. And that's okay in the sense that that is part of the continuing rolling narrative of Spottswoode and Napa and Sonoma and Greater Beyond. And you mentioned that you pride yourselves in that craftsmanship and attention to detail year in, year out. And how now that we're tasting the 18 and going back into the 17, the goal to produce tremendous wines, and where you see things most clearly, the effort and the quality and the voice coming out in the more difficult vintages, where we allow ourselves, and you allow yourself, to be proud of the wines you make in vintages like 17. And I think we want to be proud as fans of Spottswoode along with you, right? And that's fascinating. So your ethos, right? You mentioned
it's what we hope we bring to the table all of the time. It's a belief, it's a standard, it's the constant focus of all of our efforts from the very start of the season to the end of the season, rolling right back into the following season. It's how we care for the vineyard. It's how we care for the estate. It's how we care for each other, and it is that cumulative effort that I always say goes into the wine, and for me, what makes it really special. And yes, there's always a gratification and a luxury when good scores come out, but the reality is you know, the success is the effort, and the dynamics is the cumulative effort of a terroir, of a people, and how it's interacted with that actual land for decades now. And it's those beautiful pictures that we paint as we're going along through life.
Yeah, in some ways, if we can just pick on the one hand, if we could just push a button and say every vintage be as easy and effortless as 18.
No, I wouldn't want to do it.
No, right?
There's a certain luxury and ease to it, but
Yeah.
it's the same part of life. We learn so much about ourselves. We grow so much when we go through challenges in life, and it's always been the thing about biodynamics that I've loved so much, is just that it's about the rhythm, the natural rhythm of life. And when we remove ourselves from those natural rhythms, it really does become disruptive to the system. And it is something that I continue to see and feel almost more strongly, that it is a vital component of life, and obviously everything else that we do with it.
Yes, and so I'm thinking that we look. I feel as though as fans of Spottswoode, who buy in, who follow through, who have wines in their cellar. There's a question that came through about which vintage is on point right now. Hopefully that was answered, and we can maybe talk into that towards the end if we have time. But the beauty of that is that that's part of the conversation, that chronology and timeline, that we look forward to the differences, as you'd mentioned, that the vintage representation is best and more beautiful when we don't try to make homogeneous wines. You don't pick overripe, I think you mentioned, right? And 18 was an easy opportunity to do that. So why do you there's a how and a why. How is important to me as a wine geek, but why do you pick at a point in which the wines are between 13.5 and 14.5?
It was always funny because, of course, you're coming out of school and you always hear, the old adage of, it's 14% alcohol, 3.65 pH, and these are kind of these gold standards. Well, it's always the funny thing, because I don't think there is those standards didn't exist because somebody said, this is the perfect wine. What was it? It's this cumulative knowledge that develops over the years, where you see how these wines are interacting at these different phases, and you just come to the conclusion that these things are representing themselves best at this stage. And that's why I continue to say, these larger visions are great, but at the same time, on a yearly basis, you have to make different calls. And 17, when we were picking, I think our lowest bricks Cabernet that we picked was 21.5, and obviously in most books you don't do that. That's not what you're supposed to do. Right. It's what the vineyard tells you, it's what the vintage tells you, it's what experience tells you, and it's again how we find that balancing point for each vintage to hopefully express itself to its maximum, given the constructs of the vintage and the vintage variables.
Those variables.
And so it just that just continues forward. I mean, our alcohols aren't supposed to be one thing or another. They are what they are, and hopefully it's that representation of our vintage, our vision for the vintage.
I'm going to fall on my sword here for a minute, Aron, and I make a little bit of wine myself, but in a very sort of not as a full-time professional winemaker, and I tend to, therefore, because I have limited experience, fall back on numbers myself, because I don't have that level of artistry. And I think I asked the question through that lens myself, right? Where I asked a question around the alcohol levels being a certain way. And the reality is that I teach this, and yet I forget about it when I ask this question, where something as simple as, can a wine be balanced above 15% alcohol? And obviously the answer is yes, if that is what the vineyard site and the grape variety and the production and the extraction techniques give you. And nonetheless, there is an easy attraction to say and to highlight how unique Spottswoode is, where most of the time when you line yourself up with the greats of Napa Valley, you are between 0.5 and 1.5 degrees less than the average great wine, the average iconic wine, the average first growth wines of who those people are, right?
That's been changing, and I think that's overstated. And sometimes I hope the focus doesn't become just numeric.
Right, exactly. So, but at the same time, there is something there's a thread across all your vintages, which would be that no one's going to ever accuse Spottswoode of being exceedingly ripe and exceedingly extracted, right? Even though you're surrounded by vineyards that do, and that doesn't mean that their worse or better. It's just a different voice that comes out of the estate. I find that fascinating, how you're able to do how you are able to shepherd the vineyard to produce the wines that collectively, we would say over time, have that kind of expression, and still be phonetically ripe with a precision that is poetic.
The goal, the dream, I always, we can't do it without the vineyard. We have a great spice rack to be working with. We have complexity built into the vineyard in our combination of rootstocks, soils, clonal material, varietals, etc. And we don't pretend there's no goal that they all be the same thing. So then when we sit down and we have that spectrum of stuff to choose from, and we're blending, and we can look at the energies of a wine that might be lower viscosity or density, and we can look at the energies of something that has richness and texture, and see how those synergies work and work on those blends. I mean, it's a pretty magical process, and we put a lot of time into these blends and a lot of thought into them. And having just finished a couple of the blends coming for this next bottling, a half a barrel, which just less than 0.5% can be a lot, and it's a pretty fun process to see. All of that said, I know we're going to have to get through a couple of the Q&A questions too. So as things pop up, we'll start looking at those. Let's see here. What quick easy one. What is the age of your estate vineyards? Here on the estate has been planted to grapes for over 140 years, but went through a major replant back in the 70s, and then as phylloxera set in, went through another major replant primarily in the 90s. So our oldest vines are 1991 on the estate, with the next with a couple major plantings, 91, 94, 98, and then have since gone through and done a few replants in the last few years.
Question about field book Syrah looks like next.
Oh, there's a that was one of the blends we're just working on. Field book and field book might be changing in the near future, so there's some exciting things coming along those lines, I believe, but that will be discussed at a later date.
Anything else? Any other questions that I've missed? Because I feel like I was fielding most of them, but maybe not.
Yeah, let's see here. Martin, in your work with Spottswoode and others on sustainability and climate change, do you find Napa producers collectively are or need to be looking more closely at measures on how to protect resources during fires?
Specifically about fires, that is, look, we are only 4 years into I know it's longer. I get that we've had fires for a while, but that have impacted Napa the way that they have. I think there's a huge learning curve, and specifically about fires. I think when it comes to the fire question, I want to turn it over to Aron. But before I do that, because I believe that Aron's boots on the ground in a way that I'm not. I'm more, fires to me are one of the unfortunate, disheartening consequences of climate crisis tapping at our door. And I think I want to answer this through the lens of producers in Napa collectively saying to themselves, we will need to do something about the climate crisis. It's not just a climate change. It's not just global warming. It is extremes that involve humidity, winds, rain, dryness, drought, et cetera. So I think that the answer is short is yes. Elements like Napa Green, organizations like Napa Green are strengthening their certification process, both for land as well as for winery. Napa Valley Vintners themselves, as an association, is taking strong steps. But let it be known that part of my relationship with Spottswoode is in working with not just Spottswoode, but with wineries who are aligned to raise awareness of the things that can be done, whether it's greenhouse gas emission reduction, whether it is waste management, whether it is collectively looking at your supply chain to reduce your impact, or your different questions around dry goods, different questions around sourcing, different questions around light, around plastic usage, all these kinds of things that collectively, I think, yes, Napa as a whole is moving in that direction, where the stewardship of our lands it's always been there. The DNA and the conservation, the agricultural side has always been there since the 60s and 70s and 80s. But the percolation of the idea that the awareness of the climate being a point and sustainability being an effort is imbued. Now, specifically when it comes to fires, Aron, I'm happy for you to take that part of the question, collectively speaking, to protect resources during fires.
Well, and even, I mean, big picture, these have to be collective. These have to be collective actions, whether it be climate, whether it be addressing very specific fires. There is absolutely a desire to prevent the catastrophic fires, and at the same time, you know, the game's just changing. It's changing, and it's how quickly we learn from mistakes, and how quickly we learn to react to them. The great thing is yeah, you know, in the end, Conservancy is all about resource protection and resource management, whether it be protection of your waters, protection of your lands. And the reality is most of the time, you know, we're lucky enough that vineyards tend to be pretty darn good fire breaks, not impervious by any means, though. And you look at the cumulative efforts of, you know, national, state managed forestry. Everybody's learning from it. Hopefully, everybody's making decisions quick, but also the cumulative effects of 80 to 100 years of forest management take time for people to resolve, and then how you go in and actually address the real issue is not anything that's immediate, and it's certainly not cheap, and it certainly has to be done collectively. Let's see here.
We've got about 5 more minutes, and there's 2 more questions that came up that I think we can take. The second one I'll take myself, but I know that there's one that only you can answer as best as you can. The blocks that tend to ripen soonest year to year due to the location of the property. It's pretty cool if people get a chance to visit again.
Yeah, we certainly, it usually has a little bit less to do than just specific location on the property, and does have more to do in what we see, because, you know, clonally, there's not, we only have 3 cab clones, but rootstock tends to become a bigger portion of that. And because of our belief within the idea that we're still working with somewhat of a monoculture, and that everything's vitis vinifera, that, you know, we don't have the same rootstocks typically next to each other. So there are oftentimes blocks certainly that are ripening before others.
Yeah, it's fascinating to do that. And one of the things that maybe, well, I'll skip ahead, because I think that question is always going to be there when it comes to the relationship that our mailing list has with Spottswoode is maintaining an ever close relationship with knowing the story of the vineyard, from not just from Lindenhurst, which we'll come back to in a second, and the estate, but also block to block, and recognizing the blocks that make up the blends for your final blend, for your final estate blend, which is great. There's a question here about regarding climate change. We certainly have, we've more than considered experimenting with plantings. We have, you have, excuse me,
Yeah, I was gonna say we.
I'm just,
The royal we, Martin.
I'm just on the property today, and hey, look, I did help you pick out. I did contribute to the conversation.
You did, absolutely.
But no, it's Spottswoode, of course, has rows that are experimental. There's 2 whites and several, maybe half a dozen or 7 or 8 red varieties that we are experimenting. 10, we've added more that I recall. We were experimenting with. That's right, we did have 10. Planting other varieties. The short version is Mediterranean varieties around around both Spanish, Portuguese inspired, and portions of the southern French regions that are inspired, that are going to be coming online soon, that will be micro-fermented and experimented with. It's coming on soon. And that's important that, yes, we are aware of that. And there is another question about I think from specific Bordeaux wines that you see as sister vineyards. I actually haven't read this till now. I guess collaboration with other wineries within Napa that may be reflected within your wines.
The reality is there, I wouldn't say there's really any direct collaboration with other wineries here within Napa. All of that said, there's friendships and other winemakers out there that I have that I just constantly appreciate my conversations with them, how they think and look at the challenges that they have. And in the end, somebody farming up on the top of Mount Veeder versus somebody farming up on the top of Atlas Peak versus somebody farming down here on the valley floor right at the edge of the benchland. Our challenges are different. Our solutions to those challenges are different. But how we learn to look at them, how we learn to question ourselves, and how we learn to adapt, that can be very similar, and the symbiosis, or just the kind of the shared conversation around all of that is educational. And the more we educate ourselves and the more we expand upon what we know, the bigger our toolbox is, which is the name of the game. Right now, with the complexities that we have in Mother Nature, the larger the toolbox you have to address any problems or issues that arise on a given basis, the more adept you are at solving those. And that, for me, that's the name of the game.
Yeah, and you know what? That is part of the collaboration, is part of the overarching aspect. I know we're wrapping up here soon, where the Royal we, I know, but Spottswoode is also engaged in conversations around other wineries who are producing experimental, or who are planting experimental varieties to taste and so forth. And there is a warm climate tasting group that started a few weeks ago, and of course that's going to continue with Spottswoode, with a few other wineries that are out there. And within the question of sustainability, I want to make sure that we also highlight the fact that part of the story, the beautiful story about Lindenhurst, is that sustainability, climate, and so forth, it's not just about climate. Climate's one portion of that. It's also the community. It's also the grape growers, and overall the sense between Napa and Sonoma, where part of Lindenhurst's story supports that. Part of Sauvignon Blanc's story supports the fact that we have, excuse me, I keep saying we, I know I'm on the property. What can I say? You have the second and third bottom line of the sustainability of the community by supporting the grape growers who have farmed day in, day out, year in, year out, through 17, through fires in 18, through 19 and 20. And that's an important thing to say also about this, about how Lindenhurst is part of that story too.
Yep, the idea of sustainability. Well, everybody, we certainly appreciate you joining us for a quick discussion on the current release wines that have just been released within the last couple of weeks. So thank you all. Appreciate the questions. We hope you enjoy the wines. And yeah, here's to another great vintage.
Here's to another great vintage. And, Aron, I got to tell you, I think you are the best viticulturalist in the world. Why do I say that? Because I think I saw you the other day and you were outstanding in your field.
That's a terrible way to end this, but I'm sorry, we have to end it there. Okay, thanks, Martin. Thank you, everybody. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.